that case, I will get started. So thank you very much, first of all, for everybody who's taken the time to attend today. As I said, my name is Dave, and there will be some sort of opportunities for me to answer questions towards the end. So I'm sure if you just stack the questions up, then towards the end, I'm sure the IBTC team can sort of put them to me and I will try and answer them. So in terms of what we're going to try and do today, first of all, we'll have a little bit of a chat about case study for the benefit of anybody who hasn't studied case before. Talk about how these exams work. So we'll talk about the mixture of the pre-seen information and the exam and how those two components interact with each other. Talk a little bit about the support that's available from ourselves, from IBTC and from CIMA as well. And as I said, at the end, there'll be the opportunity for you to ask any questions. So not quite sure how long this is going to last. I do have a 1 hour schedule here, but I'm not feeling obligated to be exactly an hour. So it may be a little bit shorter. It may be just on time. I guess we'll see when we get towards the end. So first of all, then, in very general terms, let's talk about what case study is. And case study really is the pinnacle of the CIMA qualification. So at each level of CIMA, you have to demonstrate, using those very sort of difficult and tricky and technical objective test exams, an ability to really show the good sort of technical sort of competencies required of a management accountant. So you'll be going through all of your costing, you'll be going through sort of, financial reporting, a little bit of audit, a little bit of tax, etc., demonstrating that you can sort of do the numbers, as it were. However, the role of the modern accountant is really to be either an internal or an external business advisor. So you're there to help steer your company in the right direction. So it's no longer just about bean counting, as we say. It's about getting involved across the whole of the business in a role of different disciplines and just helping that business navigate the choppy waters ahead. So to that end, at the end of each level, you are given a case study exam to sit. And these case study exams, as we're going to see, are effectively role simulations. And what I like about them is, as you grow and progress through your qualification, and as you grow and progress through your career, you come to these kind of case studies, and they do, I think, relatively accurately reflect the sorts of tasks that you could be asked to get involved in the workplace. So we'll talk about the three different case studies to start with. So when you've done your kind of E1, F1 and P1 exams, whether you've had some exemptions or whether you've had to sit those exams, you're then in the situation, or you're then in the position at work where in theory you are a finance operator. So your role is probably still fairly operational. So you're probably quite new to accounting, you're possibly new to your job, you're new to the career. So therefore, quite expectedly, you're still doing relatively low-level tasks involving the collection and the manipulation of data. And you're typically using that data to help the business make short-term and medium-term decisions. So if you think about what you've been studying at E1 you've been looking at what an organization is, how organizations operate, and how you manage things like projects and people and technology, etc. In F1, you're starting to look at the nuts and bolts of financial reporting. So, you're progressing beyond debits and credits. You're starting to think about how to put together a set of accounts. You're starting to get a rudimentary understanding of, for example, tax regimes, so direct tax and indirect tax, etc. And then, of course, you've got your P paper, where you're starting to think in some detail now about costing. So you're starting to think about cost cards, you start to think about project costing, absorption costing, all those sorts of different costing and pricing techniques. What we're saying is, by the time you've got to this level within the organization, and you've got to this stage in your career, you're now in a position where hopefully you can start to present your findings professionally. So you can start to perform analysis on a business at around about that level, using those sorts of techniques, but then wrapping it up into something that can be used to communicate to finance and non-finance professionals. So one of the real tasks and one of the real challenges for accountants is analysing the performance across the whole of a business and then packaging that into something that accountants and non-accountants can understand. So if you're thinking about budgeting, for example, that's something you'll really probably be quite heavily involved in at the operational level. So you're getting all that data together from the business, you're comparing how the business has performed against your expectations for performance, and you're explaining away why the business is over or underperforming in different areas. So the next challenge is to say, well, how can I take all this really valuable information and how can I put it into words or put it into a format or put it into a template that can be as easily understood by a fellow accountant or somebody who works in operations or manufacturing or service delivery, etc. So that's the whole emphasis, if you like, of the operational case study, dealing with ground level operational information, providing analysis equivalent to what you would expect to be doing a year into your job as a management accountant, and then sort of transmitting and communicating that information to people who are perhaps not financially minded. And of course, this is the first opportunity you've had at CIMA to do a written exam as well. And therein lies another unique challenge. And we'll talk about how to overcome those challenges later on in this presentation. Now, perhaps a year later or so, you are progressing through your career, and of course, hopefully you're progressing through CIMA. So now you've had a look at E2, you've had a look at F2, you've had a look at P2. So in E2, you're starting to look at things like project management. So you're starting to look at the multidisciplinary interactions across the business, and in particular, again, what sorts of technologies can help you at that level of the organization. At F2, you're starting to look at sort of current and detailed financial reporting implications. So for example, you're starting to look at how to draw together a whole set of accounts and potentially thinking about group accounts and consolidation, etc. And that probably reflects your more senior role. So perhaps now in the workplace, you may have gone from presenting the management accounts or even presenting the financial accounts for one part of a business, and perhaps you're now working up a level. So you're starting to look across a whole group, for example. So you've got that technical knowledge that's necessary to present those consolidated financial reports. And of course, at P2, you're moving away from the basics of how much did it cost to make something, how long did it take, what are the variances? Well, now you're starting to think about investment appraisal. We're probably now moving into capital expenditure, long-term forecasting, etc. So where should a company invest its money? What are the best opportunities in front of it? So as we can see here, this role simulation is simulating the role of the finance manager. So if you like, you're now the boss of the person you were 12 months ago when you were dealing with the operational case study. So as it says in the kind of the high level description there, focusing on translating long-term decisions into medium-term plans. So the board of directors has said, here's what we'd like to achieve over the next 5 years. The finance manager, it's up to you really to start to craft, if you like, those operational strategies that the operational manager will be dealing with. So you're really going to start to influence the decision making of the business over the longer term. And then, of course, we take it up another level. So perhaps another year later. So perhaps you've been in the job for perhaps 3 years or maybe a little bit longer, depending upon your background and your experience. And now you're potentially a senior finance manager. So perhaps you're approaching the rank of a financial controller. So in the workplace, you're now reporting into the finance director, and therefore you're really starting to advise the board of directors. So in this particular role play, what you're going to find is you're operating at an extremely high level. But what's interesting here is although you're operating at a high level, the exam at the strategic level really isn't particularly technical in the slightest bit. Okay, you've already demonstrated through the operational level, through the management level, and through all of those objective test exams that you've just passed, that you've really got a firm grip of the technical stuff. You know, you've proven through 3 different exams, you understand accounting, you understand costing, you understand financing, you understand risk, foreign exchange, etc. So what you really need to be able to do now is say, look, if I'm in a particular situation in the workplace, if my company's in a particular scenario, how can I use those tools that I've learned about over the last 3 years to help mold the future direction of the business? How can I respond to current affairs? How does that affect the longer term planning within the business? So now you're thinking about inputting into the strategic planning process. So what you're going to find here is, if anything, the dominant influence is going to be the enterprise strategy level, so the E3 exam. As I said, there really isn't an awful lot of technical content in the strategic exam. Okay, so although you've done some very difficult exams, P3 and F3, and you've done some really technical calculations, those won't feature at all at the SCS level. In fact, I can go as far as saying, when you get to the strategic case study, you won't even be using a calculator. Okay, so you may refer to numbers. So for example, you may refer to a company's gearing level, if you're thinking about talking about raising debt or equity finance, but you wouldn't be calculating gearing and then recalculating gearing and then talking about beta factors and all those kind of icky things you would have been doing in your E3, F3 and P3 exams at the objective test level. Okay, so very much here, broad thinking, big thinking, company-wide thinking, future thinking. So the strategic case study is always a really exciting exam because you are starting to advise generally some pretty big businesses at a very high level about some really important things that are happening in and around their business at the time. So that's the background, if you like. And as I said, I really like it because as you move through your career, as you become more experienced, the nature of your role changes. Okay, and you'll find this in the workplace. You're less involved in the technical stuff. You spend less time potentially populating spreadsheets. What you're going to move towards is interpreting what's inside those spreadsheets or what's inside those databases. So you'll be thinking about how to use information rather than trying to create the information itself, which you've already proven you can do at the operational and the management levels. So let's have a think then, and let's have a look at how these exams work, okay? Because the operational, the management, and the strategic case studies all function in exactly the same way. So the exams work on a cycle, and there have been some changes. So if anybody did what was called the integrated case study a couple of years ago, and you've taken a break from your studies and you're coming back to it, you're going to find the exams have changed ever so slightly. The first thing you might notice is they're no longer called integrated case studies, they're just called case studies. And there were multiple reasons for this, but the major change that you would notice is there are no longer those kind of mysterious integration marks in the exam. So you might remember the old case studies used to have 91 technical marks and then 9 sort of integration marks. Those integration marks were a real mystery. We were never really fully satisfied in terms of how those marks were awarded, but thankfully they've gone now, so we've got even more transparency over the marking process. So the way it works is as follows. For each of the levels at approximately the same time, they're all separated by a week each. So we get operational first. A week later, we get managerial. Of course, a week later, we get strategic. Okay, we get 2 exam sittings in the year. Okay, so not 2 exam sittings, sorry. We get 2 sets of pre-seen information. There are, of course, still 4 exam sittings. But what we'll see is first of all, a pre-seen will be released. So, for example, we're approaching, believe it or not, the May sitting of case study. I know we're only in March, but May's the next sort of set of case study exams. So over the next couple of weeks, we're going to see the slow staggered release of the operational, the managerial, and the strategic pre-seen information. And that pre-seen information is released 7 weeks before the first exam. Remember, the exams can be sat on any one of 3 days, on a Wednesday, a Thursday, or a Friday. But this pre-seen information that's coming out for May will be reused for the exams in August. Okay, and then once we've been through the May and the August sitting, okay, so we've had the pre-seen, we've had the first set of exams, okay, so we've got the pre-seen coming up for May. We've then got our first set of exams in May, and of course the results will come out for those exams sometime around sort of August, July, August time. There'll then be a second sitting using the same pre-seen information. This is really important because if you're thinking about when should I sit my strategic or my operational or my management case study, it always pays to sit your exam first time either in May or in November. And the reason for that is that then, as we've said, the second set of exams using the same pre-seen information. So if you do sit your exam and you aren't fortunate enough to pass it at the first attempt, well, if you sit in May, you can resit using the same pre-seen in August. Or if you sat for the first time in November, you'll have the opportunity to resit in February. So just going back to that little sort of sequence of events, we've got a pre-seen coming out in May, or not in May, sorry, in sort of March, April time, depending on your level. You'll then have your May exams. The results for the May exams will come out in July, August time. Okay, then we'll have a second round of exams using the same pre-seen information, okay, and those exams will happen in August, and then the results for those will come out around about October. And then we go through a second cycle. So the next pre-seen will come out in November, sort of December time, okay, that will roll into the sort of November exams, and then the sitting, if you like, would be in February. Now, the pre-seen information then is typically around 26 to 30 pages long. Now, we're lucky enough at BPP, we get early sight of these, and I can tell you that on occasions they are slightly longer than that. So the upcoming strategic case study is a relatively long case study. Okay, and the whole purpose of that information, of that 26, 30, 37, 39 pages, whatever it may be, is to give you some background information on the company that you have to pretend that you work for. Okay, so you will have to pretend you're either a finance manager or a finance worker, or you are a senior finance manager. Okay, and you need to immerse yourself in that company. As I said, you really need to take on the role of the person working for that business. So you're given lots of information about your business, given lots of information about your industry, you're given lots of information about, for example, your financial results over the last number of years. Potentially, depending on the level that you're at, it may include cost cards, it may include forecasts and budgets, etc. Okay, and the whole point of this is really so that everybody who goes into the exam has exactly the same level of knowledge about the company and the industry. Okay, under the older versions of case study, there were often examples of students who just happened to work in the industry that the case was set in, and they had a really helpful advantage. So what CIMA have said is, well, no, we're going to change the way we do things. We're going to give people a much more comprehensive set of pre-seen information, and that's going to level the playing field. Now, CIMA themselves have been very clear on this. You are not required to do any external research, and you will not get any credit in the exam for bringing in external examples. Okay, so very, very clear there that everything you need to know in terms of what's going on in the run-up to the exam is contained within that pre-seen information. However, what we will say to students is there's no harm in taking a look around. And what you'll sometimes be able to do is you'll sometimes be able to identify, if you like, the company that is the subject of the case study. And then you can have a go look at their website, and you can get a little bit more of an insight into, the factors that really affect those sorts of businesses. So, for example, the very first strategic case study exam under the new sort of sitting from 2019 was a company called ShinePod, and that was very obviously based upon the Nespresso company. So it was really useful for students to be able to go and have a look at the Nespresso website and have a look at what products they offered, what services they offered, how they were dealing with one of the problems highlighted within the pre-seen information, which was recycling used pods, etc. Then have a look at what competition they were facing. Okay, so that information wasn't directly useful, I guess, but I always think it's really nice in the exam if you're presented with a problem, if perhaps you've had a look around in the industry and you've seen what people in that industry are actually doing to overcome those sorts of problems. So hopefully you've done lots of reading through your pre-seen information. You've been assisted by ourselves and by IBTC with some analysis, and we'll talk about how that's done later. And then you approach your exam. Okay, once you sit your exam in May, it takes CIMA at the moment 7 weeks to release your results. And as we've said, if you weren't successful in May, you do have the opportunity to resit in August. It's really important to appreciate there's quite a lot of confidentiality around this process. So, for example, once you've sat your exam in May, when your results come out, CIMA do not release any information from the May sitting. So they don't release exams, they don't release solutions, there's no examiner's reports. We won't get any information about the May pre-seen and its exams until after the May and the August sitting of those exams have finished. And even then, there tends to be a little bit of a time lag. So, for example, we haven't seen any information yet from the last set of exams from November and February, and here we are sort of approaching April. Okay, so there's no kind of advantage to waiting because there isn't any information released. Okay, so what else do we need to know then about these exams? Well, here's an example of what the exam actually looks like. And we know this is very accurate because this is taken from the sample exams that CIMA gave us. So you can see when you get on screen, there's the opportunity to access a calculator. As I said, you won't need that at the strategic level, but you will need a calculator function, most certainly at the operational level and probably at the management level. And you can access a scratch pad as well. So if you clicked on that, literally a whiteboard comes up and you can make sort of rather rough and crude notes on those. And then when you're presented with the task, you can always access at all times. First of all, by clicking on reference materials, that will give you information about associated articles. So typically what you're given is an excerpt from a conversation or you're given an email that you've received from your boss. And often that will make reference to external documents. Sometimes they're news reports, sometimes they're blogs, sometimes they're just, extracts from contracts, etc. And you can always access at all times the pre-seen information as well. So again, you can see next to reference materials, you could click on pre-seen. So you've always got the opportunity, if you want to go back and compare what was in the pre-seen. You can see the question on screen and you can see the reference materials. And then you can see the task itself. And another change you will have noticed if you've done case under the old regime is you're now given some indication of the weighting of each task. So in this particular example here, we've got 2 tasks, and we know there are 2 tasks because they're handily labeled A and B. Okay, and we can see the marks can be worked out because they always give us an allocation, typically within 5 or 10%. So most of them are 50-50, sometimes they're 33-33-33, sometimes they're 60-40. In this example, it's 55-45. And that's super useful, as I say, because it actually allows us to work out how many sort of marks and how much time we need to spend answering each of those tasks. So with the operational and the management case study, okay, you will get 4 tasks, and each of those tasks will look like the one on screen there. And those tasks will last 45 minutes. And those tasks will typically comprise 2 subtasks. So as we've got here, we've got subtask A and subtask B. Okay, so what you could work out here in this particular example is, well, I've got 45 minutes. The rough split here is almost 50-50. So I'm looking here as though I'd want to spend 25 minutes on the first task and perhaps 20 minutes on the second task. So that's a really useful way of balancing out your time, thinking about how many points you need to make in your answer and how much time you need to spend writing up your answer. Now, a bit of a difference at the strategic case study. At the strategic case study, you're dealing with kind of bigger issues. So here you will have 3 tasks, and each of those tasks will last for 1 hour. Okay, most of those tasks are again split into 2, which means if we've got an exam worth 100 marks and it's split into 3 tasks, each of those tasks is going to be worth 33 to 34 marks. Then each of those tasks is split typically into 2 subtasks. So if you've got 2 subtasks, they're going to be worth around about, give or take, 16 marks each. So again, it gives you a nice feel for the amount of points you need to make in your plan and how much you need to write up in your answer. And we'll address that as we work our way through this slideshow. Now, really important to appreciate that there's no point in rushing through your exam. Okay, so if I had that task on screen here and I clicked to the next page, what I would then get is a blank space to type my answer into. And above that blank space, I will be able to see the reference materials, the pre-seen information, and the question, as well as the calculator and the scratch pad. So I would have, for argument's sake, 45 minutes or an hour to type up my answer. Now, if I finish before the 45 minutes or before the hour for strategic case study, okay, there's no point in rushing on, because if I've saved 5 minutes in task 1, I won't get an extra 5 minutes in task 2, 3, or 4. Okay, when you move to the next task, the timer resets and it starts counting down from 45 minutes or from 60 minutes. So if you do find yourself in a position where you've got a little bit of time left at the end of the early tasks, it's always worth going back, making sure you've double checked your spelling, making sure that you've read the answer, or sorry, read the question correctly, have a quick read through your answer, make sure that it's nicely presented, it's well spread out, etc. As I said, there's absolutely no merit, if you're a quick worker, in flicking through. Once you leave task 1 and you go into task 2, you cannot go back. Okay, and what you will find is the tasks anyway are completely independent of each other. If you don't do particularly well on task 1, it won't harm you in task 2 or task 3. Okay, they're always very, very independent. They're marked independently. Okay, so there's no interrelation. There will be a story that runs through the exam, but there's no cross marking, if you like. So that's what the exam will look like when you see it in the exam on screen. So how do we approach the pre-seen information then? We've just got the front pages here from the 3 cases that we used in the November and the February exams. So at the operational level, it was about amazing beds. we had pry blocks at the management level, and then at the strategic level, I was busy analysing and writing exams for and teaching about Knowledge City Technology Park. And you can see here on the front page from the contents, each of them has around about 24, 21 or 26 pages of information. And depending on the nature of the case, so at the strategic level, there aren't too many numbers in there. As you work down through the managerial and you go into the operational level, you actually get increasingly large amounts of financial information. So for example, if we just look at the left at Amazing Beds here, we've got information about the company's operations on pages 11 to 14, information about the industry, page 15 to 17. Then you've got the financial statements across 3 pages. Then you've got 4 pages of budgeting. Okay. Whereas if you go across to the right-hand side and you have a look at Knowledge City Technology Park, you've just got the company's consolidated financial statements across only 2 pages. So page 16 and 17, and then they often throw in a graph that shows you the share price history, and underneath it tells you what the company's beta factor is. So much less financial information at the strategic level, which, as I said, bears out the fact that it's not a particularly technical exam, whereas at the operational level, you've still got your hands in and out of spreadsheets producing analysis. Okay, so a lot more numbers and calculations at the lower level compared to the higher levels. Now, when these pre-scenes are put together, one of the things that we have to do at BPP is we obviously have to start simulating what we think might happen in the exam. So we start to look back at past exams, and I've got a massive spreadsheet, and in that spreadsheet, for example, at strategic case study, I've got an analysis of every past exam, every question that was asked, the number of marks, and a reference to the answers and the questions, etc. So I've got this huge bank containing about 26 exams worth of information, or 26 sittings, sorry, worth of information. So this has been going on since 2015 now. This is all contained within my central master spreadsheet. What I then do at the strategic level, and I know we do the same at the operational and the management level, is we then start to cross-reference this with the pre-seen information, but also the all-important blueprints. So again, one of the big changes in the 2019 version of case study is each case study now has its own syllabus, and the syllabus is referred to as the blueprint. And the blueprint is a collection of what CIMA call the I can statements. And the I can statements, if you like, are statements of competency. Okay, so essentially saying, in order to call yourself qualified at the operational, management, or strategic level, you need to be able to do the following. Okay, so you can see we've got these core activities, and there are 6 of them at the operational case study. And that translates into just over 30 I can statements. So what we therefore need to do at BPP, and what you will need to do as a student preparing for this exam, is you need to be able to say, in the context of Amazing Beds or Pry Blocks or Knowledge City Technology Park, you need to be able to demonstrate that you can do the following. So if you were asked, can you use appropriate technologies for big data? That would be core activity A. Can you use appropriate technologies to gather data from digital and other sources to coordinate budgets in part B? In part C, can you identify appropriate key performance indicators? For part D, can you apply the principles of corporate governance and ethics? In E, can you identify relevant costs and benefits? And in part F, can you explain how to manage working capital? So when we analyze the pre-seen information, we say, okay, how could you be asked in the context of this business to do each and every one of these I can statements? And then when we go on to write our mock exams that we use for practicing with, we always make sure that, just like the real exam, that we write our questions using these I can statements. And we make sure that across all of our exams, that we've covered all of the I can statements at every single sitting. So in theory, when you get into the exam, there shouldn't be anything in there that you haven't had the opportunity to practice with in the context of your pre-seen information. And as you can see, that's a real challenge at the operational case study because there are so many I can requirements. But each of those I can requirements, if you look at them carefully, can all be traced back to E1, F1, or P1. Okay, so if we looked at core activity A, I can use appropriate technologies for gathering data, etc. Well, that's an E1 topic. Okay, we were going to go into D, applying relevant financial reporting. So for example, I can identify the impact of tax regulations on transactions. Well, that's an F1 issue. And of course, by the time we get into E and F, there's lots of P1 stuff in there about short-term decision-making, costs and working capital, etc. At the management level, we do exactly the same. So again, we take the management case study, we look at the Preseen information, and we start to ask ourselves, how could a student be asked to demonstrate that they can select appropriate investment techniques, apply project management tools, advise on the measurements and analysis of the reporting and responsibility centres, apply suitable tools for managing risk, or advising on the communications, negotiations, or conflict management processes, etc. So once again, we sit down and we try and map what's going on with these I can statements against the information we've been given in the Preseen. And if we need inspiration, we go back to those master spreadsheets we've got with every single exam and every single question and ask ourselves, how has this been tested in the past? How have CIMA written questions where they've asked students to talk about communications, negotiations, conflict management, high-performing teams, quantifying and presenting risks to stakeholders, etc.? And of course, it's one of the fun jobs I get to do, and I actually really enjoy it. And I've been doing it this week, okay, because as I said, we're very fortunate. We get sort of privileged early access to these. So I've been looking at the latest strategic case study with a colleague of mine, and we've been looking at the 19 I can statements at the strategic level and thinking about how they could apply in the context of the most current case study. So you can see at the strategic level here, I can evaluate, I can recommend, I can evaluate, I can recommend. So you've got much higher verbs being used here. You'll notice here, there's nothing to do with I can calculate. It's about recommending, it's about evaluating, it's about applying, etc. So you see these higher level skills are being drawn out as you work your way through the hierarchy of case studies. Now, just a little bit of a funny one here. We're hopefully getting to the point where we don't have to talk about this very much anymore. But there was a little bit of a kind of a black hole, as it were, when we went from the 2015 syllabus at CIMA to the 2019 syllabus. So imagine a situation, for example, where you sat your E, your F, and your P papers all before November 2019. Then you turned up to do your case study, and hey presto, you've got a case study that's based upon the new 2019 syllabus with the new 2019 sort of syllabus topics in there. So we had to come up with what we called our transitional arrangements. Okay, so how do we help students who've sat their relevant exams under the old syllabus, have taken a bit of a break from studying for whatever reason, perhaps maternity, paternity reasons, etc., or just too busy at work. And then they've come back and said, look, I've done E1, F1 and P1, but I've got this newfangled exam. It's got a whole load of stuff in there about digital technologies that I've never seen. So on our website and through the portal and through the hub that you've got access to, you can access these transitional arrangements. Okay, and transitional arrangements are essentially, we give you some excerpts that say, look, this is the stuff that you wouldn't have seen if you studied the E, the F or the P paper under the old syllabus, but you're doing your case study under the new syllabus. So if anybody's kind of, taking their time, chalking off the exams one at a time, you may go, oh, actually, I did that exam in October 2019, and since then they've changed the syllabus. There's a whole load of digital stuff in there that I just don't understand, I haven't seen before. I didn't study cryptocurrency, for example. So we always say to students, well, first of all, number one, relax. Okay, remember, certainly by the time you get to the managerial and the strategic level, okay, case should be treated as a standalone exam. Okay, you've already demonstrated you've got all the technical stuff in E3, F3 and P3. So at the strategic level exam, you don't have to worry too much about new technical knowledge because there isn't an awful lot of it. Now, this is more of an issue at E1, F1 and P1 because it's a more technical case study. Remember, the detailed theory has already been tested in the objective test exams. So any calculations you do get won't actually be that complex. Okay, it's about your ability, if you think about case, to manipulate information and to communicate what's inside that information, not to prove, as you've already done in your E1, F1 and P1 and E2, F3, F2 and P2 exams, that you can perform complex small calculations. Also remember, case is skills-based, it's not knowledge-based, okay? Case is showing people what you can do, not what you know, okay? If you think about it, if you were on a ship and your ship was sinking, nobody would care, okay, that you knew all the architectural drawings and plans and the technical specifications of the ship. All they want to know is, can you get us off this ship and can you get us safely to shore? Okay, so show us your skills, don't show us your knowledge. Okay, just because you know stuff doesn't mean that you're making yourself particularly useful just by demonstrating that knowledge. If you're working through BPP's materials with IBTC, the great news is you'll be working through a workbook, and those workbooks are written in such a way that they cover every single one of the I can statements. So even if there was something that you haven't seen before, you will see an example written around some pre-seen and unseen information that will allow you to practice demonstrating that you can do that thing that you may not have seen before. As I've said, we do exactly the same with our pre-seen analysis and with our mock exams. So when we write our mock exams and you start doing your practice exams with IBTC, you will see more examples in topics that you didn't see just because of the nature of the timing of when you sat your OT exam. So yes, it's important that you familiarize yourself with new topics. Okay, so specific example here, if you sat your P3 exam after the 4th of November, okay, there will be some applied information or knowledge about digital strategies, risk and hedging that you will possibly not have seen depending on the nature of the time of your P3 and F3 exam. But that information is available on our hub, okay, on our virtual learning environments. It can be read up through and it can be practiced through the workbook. And if it's relevant to your exam, it will feature in the mock exam. So if you like, we've got this triple lock to make sure that you're not disadvantaged. Now, hopefully we're getting to the point in 2021 where that's increasingly becoming rare and unlikely. So in terms of what you need to do then with the pre-seen information, okay, and this is something that again we help you with because we do provide you with some analysis. So we provide you with very detailed documents, often 12 to 16 pages long. Okay, what those documents aim to do is they aim to get you to read through the pre-seen information and to help you identify the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities and threats. We get you to think about the pestle features. We get you to think about the company's products, services, its competition, its markets. We get you to understand its financial position. So what, for example, is its gearing level? What are its interest cover ratios? Does it have the capacity and the ability to take on more debt if it needs to invest using debt finance? We get you to think about the industry. What are the emerging opportunities in this company's industry and what threats do these businesses face? And there are always some nice media articles at the back of the pre-seen information packs, and they tell us about the current events. And it's those current events that really tend to give us a little bit of a steer into what's likely to happen in the exam. And then crucially, we always encourage students to know your blueprints. The blueprint says, I can, and sometimes those I cans run to over 19 or 30 or 33 different sort of competencies. So we always ask the questions to the student, can you advise any particular business about these particular knowledge competency areas? But of course, what you have to avoid doing is just copying out the stuff you learned with BPP and IBTC. It's absolutely no use to you at all reading through our materials and then when you get into the exam, just kind of reproducing the answers that we've given you to our mock exams. Okay, prefabricated answers are something the examining team absolutely always crack down very hard on. So if you read what I've extracted here from an examiner's report, some responses read as if candidates have read the pre-seen and have prepared a response to a topic which has fortunately come up in the exam. So you've seen an I can statement and you've seen a question related to that and you've gone, oh yeah, I've got this prepared statement here. Unfortunately, those answers often stress the information drawn from the present to the exclusion of the additional information that is provided in the unseen content that accompanies the requirements. These prefabricated answers read as if they've been written in advance and are then reproduced by the candidates without much attempt to reflect on all the facts that the examiner has provided. These types of responses earn very few marks. So in other words, the pre-seen information is there to familiarize you with the context in which the business is operating. When you get into the exam, you need to react to the events of the exam. Okay, so you need to say what's going on in the exam, what problems they face, what practical solutions do they need to help them overcome those problems. So how do we approach the exam then? Okay, so first thing to be aware of is every case study exam is finely balanced. So for example, at the strategic level, every exam will have I can statements that cover all of the 5 core activity areas. There are 5 core activity areas at the management level, and at the operational level, there are 6. And again, CIMA have always stressed, and we've seen this through our own analysis of past exams, that every exam will cover something from A, B, C, D, E, and at the operational level, also F. Each case study will have anywhere between 3 or 4 variants. In actual fact, they can be as high as 6 different variants. What this means, of course, is if CIMA detect there's some cheating going on, they can switch the variants around very quickly. But crucially, if you sit the exam in May and you have to re-sit the exam again at the August sitting, you will be given a different variant. Obviously, CIMA will have a record of the variant you attempted at your first sitting, and they'll make sure you get a different exam. These exams are human marked, and they're human marked using CIMA's famous scaled scoring. Okay, and with scaled scoring, all we really need to know is this. When you get your email from CIMA with your results, as long as you've got a score of 80 or above, then congratulations, you have passed. Okay, now of course we're all accountants. We do 80 divided by 150 and we say, wow, that's 53%. But that is not the pass level. CIMA are always very, very clear here that they will not give us a pass mark. The whole idea of the scaled scoring is if there are 3 different variants of the exam, and in variant 1, students are getting very high marks, and in variants 2 and 3, they're getting comparatively lower marks, what CIMA will do is they will adjust the pass mark between exam variants 1, 2, and 3 to make sure they've got broadly equal levels of candidates passing each variant. Sometimes you will just accidentally write questions that are too hard or too easy. Okay. What CIMA did tell us is that when they introduced scale scoring in 2015, that this would not materially affect the pass mark. Okay, and under the old syllabus, the pass mark for case study, it was that you needed a score of 60%. So we always say to students, when you're practicing with our mock exams, if you're scoring consistently well over 60%, you're exactly on the right track. Okay, if you're scoring 55 to 60%, you're probably on the bubble and you've got a little bit of improvement to show. Okay, so we can't ever say the pass mark or the pass rate is 60%. Okay, but we all say to students, you've got to be scoring in excess of 60% to be confident that you will get the 80 out of 150 required. Now, if you want more information on scale scoring, CIMA have some very informative videos that you can look up on YouTube or via their own website. Now, again, if you sat the old case study, you might remember there was this really weird thing they said where you had to be competent in the 4 key skills. That is no longer the case. There is no requirement to be competent in all areas. As long as your scaled score is over 80, okay, you will pass the exam. And as I said right at the beginning, there are no longer those kind of mysterious integration marks. Now, we've already taken a look at an example of an exam question, but here's another example. Okay, so what do exam questions look like? Okay, so exam questions typically, as I said, come in the form of a conversation or an email. Okay, and then they make the questions very clear. So they say, I would like you to do the following, and you know it's a question requirement because at the end it will say subtask and it will have a percentage jotted on the end as well. Okay, so here, can you prepare briefing notes for me to use in my presentations to the board? Use note 1 and consider financial and non-financial factors. And then blah, 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 blah. Secondly, use the figures for the gym project. Prepare notes that I can use in a training session about sensitivity, scenario planning, etc. Okay, so this is a 45-mark question. Okay, so we've got subtask A, which is worth 60%. So if we've got an exam worth 100 marks, the exam's broken into 4 sections at operational, obviously that's 25 marks each. So the first part is worth 60% of 25. So the first part is worth 15 marks and the second part is worth 10 marks. So the next question is, well, okay, how do I turn that into an answer? What should my answer look like? I often think this is a bit of a shock at the operational level because this may be the first time you've done a written exam in quite some time. Okay, all the CIMA exams you've done to this point will have been multiple choice, multiple response, etc. So you've done objective test exams. Now you've got to demonstrate high quality communication skills. Well, what we always say to students here is try and follow the example that we set you when we write our mock exams. So when you're doing your practice mock exams with IBTC, try and do what BPP and IBTC are doing here. Okay. Notice here, part A of the exam said, can you talk about the financial and the non-financial factors? So the first thing we've done here is we've broken our answer in 2. You can see the heading in bold, financial factors, non-financial factors. Then what we've done is every time we want to make a point, every time we want to write about something, we make sure it's included in its own distinct separate paragraph. And this is really important because it makes it so much easier for the marker. Okay, the marker sees something in a particular paragraph and they like what's in there, they're instantly thinking, oh, fantastic, something positive has been written. As they start to read through this, they then start to determine whether or not it's basic facts that are being presented, or is it in-depth analysis? Does it contain recommendations, justification, and high levels of analysis, etc.? And you'll see we just repeat this process over and over again. We go back to the requirements. I'll go back to the previous slide. So the previous slide says, prepared briefing notes for me, use note 1, consider financial and non-financial factors. So we've said, okay, there are 15 marks available here. We've got to talk about financial and non-financial. So we're perhaps looking at each part being worth 7 or 8 marks. So if each of these particular paragraphs here is worth 2 or 3 marks, you can very quickly see here that this would be a perfect answer that would potentially score all of the marks that are available. Now, in terms of how CIMA mark this, the mark grids they give us are really quite advanced, and they're written in this particular way here because it corresponds with the way that higher and further education is regulated in the UK. Okay, so depending on the level of education you're at, you're deemed to be at level 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8, depending on whether you're doing O-levels, A-levels, a bachelor's degree, master's degree, a PhD, or postgrad qualifications. And interestingly, when you're doing CIMA, this is the equivalent to doing a master's degree or higher. Okay, so what CIMA use to mark their exams is they use these levels. Okay, so are you achieving level 1, 2, or 3? Okay, so if you write nothing, hey presto, you get nothing. You get 0 marks. If you merely describe something, you get 1 or 2 marks. If you discuss something, you get 3, 4, or 5 marks. If you justify something, so if you provide a high level of analysis that says, this is the reason why my analysis is worthwhile, this is why it's relevant, this is why you ought to follow my advice, then you get those kind of higher 6, 7, or 8 marks. And it's really useful to look at my next slide, which again is a direct extraction from an examiner's report that helps us identify how much we need to write, how many points we need to make in our answers. So here we go. For a 12-mark answer, it might be possible to identify, say, 4 issues. A candidate who aims to write about 4 topics only has to score 3 marks on each of their observations in order to obtain the full marks. And that leads us to something that we know about because, of course, lots of us at BPP have or do mark for the professional qualifications. So, for example, I have marked for a couple of the professional bodies. I also write exams for a couple of the professional bodies. So I know all about what we call the rule of 2, the rule of 3, or sometimes the rule of 4. So the rule of 2 is quite straightforward. Every time you write something up in an exam for a case study, whether it's at operational management or strategic level, you are guaranteed a minimum of 2 marks if what you write is relevant and well explained and well related to the pre-seen and the unseen information. Sometimes it's worth 3 marks. It can on occasions be worth 4 marks. And that's really super useful because if we go back to a question here, we've got a question here, subtask A, 60%. We said that was worth 15 marks. We know everything we write is worth a minimum of 2 marks. So we've got a 15-mark question, and each point we make is worth a minimum of 2 marks. Well, that means we've only got to make 7 or 8 observations. And we know we've got to talk about financial and non-financial. So if I came up with 3 or 4 financial points, each worth a minimum of 2 marks, then thinking, wow, yeah, I've got 6 or 8 marks. If I do the same for non-financial, I double my marks and I get up to 15. And hence you can see here, if you imagine that each of these paragraphs is worth 2 marks, I've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, potentially 18 marks there. So I've got a very, very complete answer. And we know that sat behind these sort of section 1 traits, descriptors and levels, etc., the same approach is in fact used at the professional marking for these exams. And this is why when we prepare our mock exams, and these are the exams that you will practice with IBTC, we take exactly the same approach. So here we've got an example from a mock exam that I wrote a little while ago. It says in the first part, I plan on raising this partnership with the professor, but ahead of this, I'd value your thoughts on the risks this partnership represents to KCTP and how we might respond to these. So if we think about what that question is asking us, that question is asking us to think about risk and then responses to risk. So the way that we take the kind of the rule of 2 or the rule of 3 is we say, okay, 47%. So this is, for example, a strategic case study. So each of these questions is worth 33 or 34 marks. What we're saying here is this first requirement is worth half of those marks. It's probably worth about 16 marks. So it's worth 16 marks, and you're asked to do 2 things. You're asked to talk about risks. Well, risks must be worth half of those marks. They must be worth about 8. And responses to risks, similarly, must be worth around about 8 marks. You think, okay, how many risks do I need to talk about, and how many responses do I need? Well, by the time we get to the strategic level, we're typically dealing with the rule of 3 rather than the rule of 2. So if I've got 8 marks for talking about risks, I must have to identify 3 risks. So what you'll see is that when we get to the mark scheme, okay, we say identifying risks, you get a mark for identifying, and a mark for identifying is just like saying in level 1 describes the relevance or describes something. And then we say if you go on to meet levels 2 and 3, so if you then go on to describe, if you then go on to justify, then you can get an extra 2 marks for reaching those higher levels. So you can see if you identify 3 marks and talk about them thoroughly, okay, then you will get 9 marks. If you do the same for identifying the responses to those risks, you get the other 9 marks, then your marks are capped at a total of 16. And that's interesting because there are always more things you can say in response to a question than marks that are available, which means that you could sit down next to a colleague, you could attempt the same question, and you could come up with slightly different answers, but you could still both score very good marks. Because certainly by the time we get to the strategic level, we don't always know what the best answer to a particular question is. Because when a company is thinking about strategy, it's thinking about the future. Dealing with uncertainty, and we're dealing with a lot of subjectivity. Perhaps at the operational level, things are a little bit more objective. And then when we mark these within BPP, we then use these detailed mark grids. We say, look, every time you identify a risk, we tick one of these boxes and you get a mark. And then when you're explaining the risk, we give you a mark of 0, 1, or 2. So you then end up with a very detailed breakdown of how your marks have been gathered. And I think that's really useful because when you go back over your script and you look at your marks, you can see exactly where you were getting marks. But of course, the most important thing to look at when reviewing a script is see where you didn't get any marks, because you're looking to see where you can improve and where you can do better next time, rather than what did I do well this time, because you're probably going to do that quite well the following time as well. And in terms of what that looks like as a written answer, again, just like we gave you in the previous example, we've got some headings. So we've said, here's the headings about the risks, and then below, we've got the headings around responses. And then in each of those headings, we know that each of our little paragraphs is worth a mark for identifying something relevant and a couple of extra marks for explaining and relating. So you can see here lots of very small, individual, highly focused little paragraphs. And each of these paragraphs aims to say something that talks about the company. So if you kind of scroll your way down, you'll see lots of references to things like KCTCP and Sky Park, which was the business and the company that owns the business that was subject to that particular case study. So everything in there talks about the case study, it talks about the company, or it talks about something that's, within the question. So we're talking about the university here, we're talking about a Twitter feed, we're talking about the person who's asked us the question, Professor Helga, etc. So everything is done with the intention to link it back to the case study. So some general thoughts then, sitting alongside this, on how to write up your answers. So I always say 3 things to students. Number 1, it's a role-based simulation. Keep it real. Okay, in the real world, nobody sits in a meeting and says, Michael Porter said that it was important. Nobody says that. We talk about entry barriers, and we talk about competitive pressures, and we talk about, for example, what's going on with our customers and what's going on with our suppliers, but nobody ever says Michael Porter. Okay, so when you're talking about the 5 forces, everybody knows what they are, everybody has an awareness of them, but we never talk about them in the context of Porter said. We always say, look, I don't really care what Porter said in 1918 in his book. What I want to know is, how can that help me now? So therefore, you must keep your answers relevant. So your answer can't be prefabricated. It must address the issue at hand. So here's a classic example from an older case study. So when attempting a requirement, you should take care to identify 1 or more factors that might be relevant to valuing the company and explain why that approach would be relevant. This might sound obvious, but Candidates are often tempted to offer irrelevant arguments just for the sake of writing something in their answer. So we had an example of a company called Benton Farm Management. It was an unquoted, privately owned company, and we were looking to value it. So any candidates who wrote about checking its share price were totally wasting their time because it wasn't listed, so it didn't have a share price. Also, the company was owned 100% by its current founder, who had total control over dividend payments. So anybody who tried to talk about the dividend valuation model, again, weren't going to get any credit for that. Dividend valuation model is only relevant where you're looking to buy a minority stake in a business. You don't have any real influence. All you really get is a constant flow of dividends. Also, keep it short and sweet. Okay, don't use words for the sake of it. So at BPP, we go to extraordinary lengths to try and keep our answers concise. I always challenge myself at the strategic level to make sure my entire answer is less than 3,000 words long. So you will lose credibility, it says here, by finding a keyword in the requirement and writing everything you know about it. Okay, and the examiners and the markers refer to this as brain dumping. Okay, and brain dumping will not score credit. They want practical advice to help them overcome practical problems. So in terms of the resources that are available to you, obviously you will get access to what we call achievement ladder steps, sometimes referred to as practice mock exams or practice assessments. Okay, there are recorded lectures. So if you needed to catch up with technical knowledge that you were weak on or thought you were missing, they're available. We provide you with achievement ladder step case familiarization. We have some recorded analysis of some of the mock exams. We prepare PDFs. We sometimes give you Excel sheets. We give you lots of information to help you identify what you did well and what you did badly in each of your achievement ladder steps or any of your practice mock exams. As I've said, go back, look at what marks you didn't get rather than the marks you did get, and think, why didn't I get those marks? What do I need to do differently next time to improve? All of those achievement ladder steps have debriefs of various types. Sometimes they're video debriefs, sometimes it's a debrief PDF, sometimes it will be a full marked script with comments on. Take on board those comments. And remember, when you're studying, okay, even if it's late at night, you're sat somewhere remote or you're bored or on your own, you're never actually on your own. Okay, there's always somebody out there to help you, whether it be IBTC, BPP, CIMA, or your fellow studiers. If you've got access to student forums, use them. Okay, there's no such thing as a stupid question. There are only stupid answers. Okay, and remember, most of the time, if you're thinking about a question you have and you're too scared to ask it, there's probably 3 or 4 other people who are in exactly the same boat. And when you ask that question, they're kind of secretly punching the air, thinking, "Thank goodness somebody asked that question, because now I've got the answer." Okay, so use your powers of communication. You know, be sociable. Use your social media skills to explore the topics that you need help with. So I would just like to wrap up by saying thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to attend your conference. It's been an absolute blast for me. I like nothing more than talking, and I like nothing more than talking about case study. As promised, if you have any questions, I am now available to take them. So I'm going to hand back over to Nikki, and Nikki, I will try and answer any questions that you throw my way.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dave. It's great. I always try to write down all the things that I like or didn't know, but now I have a list as long as my arm. So if you guys have another hour, then. So what I did want to say, something that didn't come up, was we usually said, I don't know if it's still relevant, but we used to say to our students around the time of the case study, read the newspaper. I always find that whatever is relevant in the news somehow makes it into the case study, as if, I don't know, as if pulling a case study is something that doesn't take a long time, or pulling it together. So I don't know, do you find that's quite relevant to be quite aware of what's going on in the world around the time of the case study?
Normally, yes, but I'll add a massive proviso here. As I said, I can't give anything away because we're under sort of an embargo of secrecy with CIMA, but CIMA are taking the approach that pretty much you are to ignore COVID-19. So if you're told in your Preseen information, you know, this business is unaffected by COVID, do not talk about COVID, because you will be very explicitly and specifically wasting your time. So I think they're taking the approach that COVID isn't happening, because of course in the vast majority of business cases it's ruinous and it's highly disruptive.
Totally. Yes, yeah. too disruptive. What I was thinking of, I remember in the days when the Gap, what was it, the scandal of sweatshops. hit the
Yes.
newspapers, and then 2 or 3 months later you would see it in a case study. Or fast fashion as a disruptor, the
Yeah.
Zara or Zara model, and then that was in the case study. Or the disruption of the volcano, for instance, then that would make it into a case study. So COVID aside, I think if there's an oil spill or things like that, then often it comes up in the case studies, I find.
Yeah, very true.
The other thing that somebody still asked at the end of your presentation, so can I write too much? And it is one of the things that I say, yes, 1,000 times, yes, absolutely, you can write too much. And it reminds me of a thing that I like to say sometimes. There's the story is about a woman who wrote a letter to her friend or to someone, her husband, and it's this long letter, and she's writing and writing, and she ends it off by saying, I'm sorry the letter is so long. If I had more time, it would have been shorter. And it's about planning your answer, about writing down what is relevant, about making sure it's succinct, it is relevant, and not doing the brain dump. Nobody is impressed with how much you know or how much you've studied or how much you can write, and it actually counts against you. Then the other thing that I liked what you said was, keep it real. Nobody sits in a meeting and says, well, according to Porter's 5 forces. So I liked that. And then there were some other things I wanted to say that 2 things. I often try to explain to people the benefit of signing up with a college, because some people like to go it alone, and I think that's fine. You can study on your own, you can get the books and go it alone. But as you explained what you do at BPP to analyze the case study and then go back to the long spreadsheet of past questions and how was this asked before, and comparing it to the can-do statements and see how can this be asked. I think if you go to a tuition provider and you get your BPP resources and you get your hub, which we call the online portal, then all that work has been done for you. And as a student, you should benefit from that and focus on studying, not necessarily focus on trying to map things back to past questions and can-do statements. That's why you are joining the experts. And that's why you're signing up with the college.
Yeah, I think it's like buying a complete model working car as opposed to buying a Lego set in the box. We've put all the bits together for you. You know, we've done all the complicated thinky stuff for you. You can just go out and play with it.
Okay, that is a good analogy. Then for those who thank you for weaving IBTC in so nicely into your presentation. For those of you who don't know how it works, IBTC is the exclusive provider of BPP courses and course material and integrate their resources into our teaching. And part of where we come from is we from the onset went out to go look for the provider who has the best pass rate, who consistently delivers a pass rate that's higher than the global average, and also looked at the online component. And after years of being in education, it was the first time that I found an online course that I thought, oh, there you go, they've got it right. That perfect combination of being online with offline support, that virtual and real people combination. And then we knew it is something that we wanted to bring to the South African audience, but then at an African price. So in our dealings with BPP, we are in a position to bring all the richness of that BPP expertise and resources to South Africa and Southern Africa. So that is just to clarify where we fit in. I think this was a very popular session with lots of questions, so I don't want to skip the question component. I know we are a little bit over time. So let me just see. Pam said she had a good question here. I think the question was around, but I did think you did answer it. It was around how does the timing relate back to the marks? But you did explain. I like that, 46%. So I can see 8 and 8 or 16 marks, 8 and 8. I quite liked how you did that. Or am what I'm saying making any sense? The one example went from 46%. That means it's 16 marks. That means it's by the rule of 2 or 3. It means 8 or 2. And maybe the person who asked that and missed that can just rewatch that part of the video. Then are there any other? Feel free to either Pam or Sharissa, or somebody who has got a nice question. Pranisha says, what's the recommendation for gateway students not having gone through OT exam? What's the best approach? And if you have a bit of a time crunch.
Nikki might be able to help here. With OT students, I think you ought to go through the ICANN statement, the blueprints for your level, and they're freely accessible. If you Google them, the easiest way to find things on the CIMA website is to Google for it, and it will link you through. Go through those ICANN statements and ask yourself the question, can I do that? Okay, if you don't think you can do that, then you'll need to go onto your portal, your forum, your hub access, whatever you might have, and work through the relevant exercises. Okay, so, can you undertake relevant costing? Can you advise on risk management, so on and so forth? So use those ICANN statements, if you like, as a checklist, and go down and tick them off. And any that you can't tick off, that's got to be the focus for you. There's no point in sort of relearning things you already know.
Then tell me, I don't know if you have the answer for this, but when students sign up with IBTC for their classes, their campus classes, virtual classes, or for the BPP online classes or home study, our various packages has got what you refer to as the hub, and we call our online portal. If I get access, if I sign up for a case study course with IBTC and I get access to the hub or the online portal, I believe there is OT content on there. There's the gap material on there in case you already wrote the exam and you need to transition and the elements that you missed. But there's also all the recordings of the whole EP or F subject. Isn't that right?
Yeah. So for example, imagine you've done Gateway and you've missed your E's, your F's, and your P2 exams. When you go on to through your portal or your hub, there are two sort of tiles you can look at. One of them is called Transitions, and that just shows you what's new in the 2019 syllabus. And then there'll be another section called Exemptions. And within Exemptions, what you'll have is the full suite of recorded deliveries and access to the course notes for the exams that you've been exempt from. But again, very much would stress here, if you feel like you can answer lots of those ICANN questions already, look at the ones that you don't feel comfortable with and go and listen to those parts of the recordings or look at those chapters. Yeah, so try and be focused if you can. It's a real challenge doing the Gateway exam. The pass rates are a lot lower for Gateway students than for students who've gone through the objective test exams. So I think you really do need to go through that extra step of making sure you know what you know and knowing what you don't know yet.
Excellent. Then I can see somebody logged on their mom's PC because it says his name is Mom PC and said, just passed my P1 and you have prepared me well to tackle my May case study. Thank you, Dave.
Good luck. You're welcome. Very best of luck with that.
Abigail says, excellent presentation, Dave. Thank you, Dave. It was so insightful. I'm going to allow a couple more questions. If you have a burning question that hasn't been responded to yet, then feel free to post it now. I will keep Dave busy so that he can, let me just see. Let's see. Any final questions, guys? Dave, what does it feel like to reach out all the way to South Africa and Southern Africa to help us with our case study?
It's so much fun, honestly. Lockdown's been a real blessing. I've started using a cycling app called Zwift, and I cycle with people all over the world. This evening I'm in a bike race with some folks from North America, Middle America. Wow. I haven't ridden with any African people yet, but I've ridden with people from Australia, the Philippines, Russia, Norway, Iceland, Holland, you name it. So the internet and lockdowns really made the world feel a lot smaller.
How does it work? Do you sit behind your computer and do it?
Yeah, you sit on a bicycle on a machine.
Bicycle.
So it reads the sort of speed and power off your bike, and then you have an avatar on screen, and the people you're racing against also have avatars. So You're
Oh,
kind of
wow.
immersed in a virtual environment. And because I do a lot of team-based racing, we have headsets on whilst we're riding. We have sort of small headsets and we communicate. And yeah, so I honestly, it's
Is it a
improved my Spanish
stationary
no end.
bike?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay, okay. I've got a very good question. The question of the day from Fikile. What can one do between now and April to prepare for the May case study?
Okay, so if you sit tight, the case study will arrive in the next week or 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the level you're at. So for example, the operational case study should come out to students on Friday. At which point ourselves and IBTC will release some pre-scene analysis. So you get some analysis, we'll step you through the exam, sorry, the pre-scene, and we'll say, you know, this is what we think is important, this isn't so important. We'll help you with the SWOT and the PEST. We'll help you with the ICANN statements. We give you a big list of the ICANN statements and say, well, in the context of this exam, you know, what could happen that would trigger a question in this particular area? And by the time you've worked your way through that, hopefully you'll have a really good idea of, you know, what questions could come up in conjunction with that particular exam, and you'll be hopefully in a position to be prepared to answer them. If you then go on to a course with ourselves, you're then going to see mock exams that are written around the same sorts of themes. So the key thing is working your way through that document. It comes out in two phases. There's what we call an initial document. So initial document is full of questions. There's loads of spaces for you to put your answers down. Then a week or two later, we release the final version, which has our thoughts and observations. So we invite you to do some analysis, and then we provide you with some solutions and some guidance. So that's the most important thing to do.
Excellent. And then my last question for the night is, I don't know if you're going to like this question, Dave. Can you handle it? What is the minimum time needed to prepare for a case study?
Oh, goodness me. I love this question. It's a really massively important thing in your life. It's like if you were going to buy a house or you were going to buy a car or you would get married, nobody would ever ask you what's the minimum amount of time you would spend getting to know somebody or looking at a house or looking around cars. And it's the same with exams. What you'll get out is what you put in. Okay, so at the strategic level, if you were really time poor and you were really lazy and you weren't particularly motivated, I think the bare minimum you could get away with is probably about 30 hours. So that's the time it's going to take you to study, to attempt and to debrief 3 or 4 high quality mock exams, and then the time is going to take you over and above that to become familiar with the pre-scene information. So I think you're looking at 30 hours. Now, if somebody said to me, can you give me 30 hours of your time, and in exchange for that, I will give you a lifelong career with some really prestigious letters and a big fat pay rise, I would snap their hand off. I wouldn't sleep for 3 days. I'd just get it over and done with. So you're being offered something magnificent, something amazing, something really valuable. So grasp that opportunity. Don't think what's the minimum you can do. Think about what's the best I can do.
Oh, I like that. I like that. Often it's about students thinking, oh, should I go for May or August? Is there still enough time to push for May? And I think it's often how much time you make available. So you can still go for May if you're willing to sacrifice your Saturdays and Sundays. And really, I also feel that the CIMA qualifications got so much richness to it. That syllabus, you just learn such amazing things that if you rush it and you skim through it, then you're really just cheating yourself.
Yeah,
that's what I say. I don't have to study and go do an exam. Okay, I think that, well, I just lost you there for a moment. I think you were just to say when I was a student. Now we're all dying to hear what happened when you were a student.
Yeah, when I was a student, when I was a final level student, I went out and bought a really expensive car with a massive loan. And if I did qualification pay rise, I wouldn't be able to afford to repay the loan. So I needed to pass that exam. It was a financial necessity.
Like a little bit of a carrot. Yes, totally. Okay, guys, I'm going to call it a night. I want to thank everybody for participating. A big thank you to BPP and to CIMA for being such great partners. And thank you, Dave, for your time and for doing our wrap-up party, really.
No, thank you for having me. It's been a blast.
Excellent. We will do it again soon.
Cool. Best of luck, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.